Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why sometimes listening to music just makes you feel worse instead of better? Well, this new study dives deep into that very question. Today we're talking about something called maladaptive music listening, or MML. Now, music is amazing, right? It can boost our mood, help us connect with others, and even be used in therapy to help with things like anxiety and depression. But what happens when listening to music actually hurts our mental health? That is the puzzle researchers are trying to solve. This paper looked at a bunch of past studies to figure out what maladaptive music listening really is, how people measure it, and if it connects to our personalities. They did two main things. First, they reviewed many studies to find common ideas about what MML means and how it is measured. Second, they did a meta-analysis, which is like combining the results of several studies, to see if there is a link between our personality and MML. Think about it. Music is everywhere. It can be a friend when you're lonely or a shield against feeling down. We even have music therapy to help people with all sorts of issues. But sometimes, maybe when you're feeling sad, you put on sad music and wow, you just go down a rabbit hole of feeling worse. Or maybe you listen to music so loud it's damaging. Kind of like how some people might misuse substances. So how did they figure this out? For the first part, they did a systematic review. Imagine them going through a massive library of scientific articles, looking for specific keywords related to maladaptive, dysfunctional, or unhealthy music listening. They searched big databases for studies published after the year 2000. After sifting through hundreds of articles, they narrowed it down to 18 studies that really focused on how we define and measure this idea of unhealthy music listening. This flowchart shows you their whole process, from finding lots of papers to carefully selecting the ones that fit their research question. It is like a treasure map of their study selection. When they looked at how ML was defined, they found one big umbrella theme: poor psychological health. That's the main idea. Underneath that, they found 4 more specific themes. This diagram shows you how they broke it down. The big idea is poor mental well-being, and then there are these specific ways that happens. One interesting finding was that a lot of these definitions pointed to teenagers and young adults. It's not necessarily that only young people do this, but that's who is studied the most. This could be because music is a really big part of growing up and figuring out who you are. Or it could be because the tools used to measure MML were first developed for younger people. Another theme was externalizing problems. What does that mean? It is like outward behaviors related to not controlling impulses, like breaking rules, being aggressive, or having trouble paying attention. So sometimes unhealthy music listening is tied to acting out. Then there are internalizing problems. This is more about how someone feels on the inside. Think about feelings of sadness, anxiety, or even physical symptoms that might be related to stress. So ML can be linked to these inner struggles too. A huge part of the definitions was inefficient coping. This means using music in ways that don't actually help you deal with problems or difficult emotions in a healthy way. And within this inefficient coping theme, they found even more specific strategies. One of these is emotion or problem avoidance. This is when you use music to run away from your feelings or problems instead of facing them. It is like hiding from your emotions with tunes. Another strategy is mood worsening. This is when you intentionally listen to music that you know will make you feel worse, or that just keeps you stuck in a bad mood. This might seem counterintuitive, but it happens. Then there is social isolation. This is when you use music to deliberately cut yourself off from other people, to isolate yourself. It's not just about avoiding emotions, but actively creating distance from others. Finally, they found rumination and self-blame. Rumination is like getting stuck in a loop of negative thoughts about yourself, your feelings, or bad experiences. So, listening to music while dwelling on your mistakes or guilt fits into this category. Now, how do researchers actually measure this stuff? They looked at the tools and tests used. The main idea they found was looking at interactions with music. This means how we engage with music itself. This major theme had 2 main branches. One is music preferences. This is about what kind of music you like and why. A big part of this was looking at whether people enjoy listening to sad music. Scales like the Like Sad Music scale are used here. The other branch is engagement strategies. This is about how you listen to music and what you do while listening. For example, studies use scales like the healthy, unhealthy music scale, or the brief music and mood regulation scale, to see if your listening habits are helping or hurting you. This table is a bit of a cheat sheet showing you all the different studies they looked at for measures, what kind of people were involved, and what specific tests they used. It shows a lot of different tools, but they all boil down to understanding how we dive into music. So, what does study 1 tell us? It is helping to clear things up. ML is really linked to poor psychological health, and it often involves these inefficient coping methods like avoidance, mood worsening, isolation, and rumination. The focus on adolescents might be because music is so central to their lives. But it also could be because the common measurement tools are mainly tested on them. Now, they were honest about some problems. The big one is that this focus on adolescents might make us think ML only happens to young people, but adults definitely can do it too. They also point out that we don't know for sure if poor mental health causes MLL, or if MML causes poor mental health. It could be a two-way street. They also mentioned that looking only at music might be too narrow. There are other things that might be similar, like maladaptive daydreaming, where people get lost in fantasies, sometimes with music. So looking at the bigger picture of how we cope might be really helpful. Okay, so study 1 gave us a clearer picture of what MML is and how it is measured. Now study 2 wants to know, does our personality play a role? They decided to look at the big 5 personality traits, which are basically openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. They used their previous search terms and added in words related to personality like neuroticism and big 5. They searched the same databases. It was a bit tricky because one database, JSTOR, didn't allow their full search, so they had to manually check some results. When they dug into the personality studies, they found something interesting. Most of the research focused on just one personality trait, neuroticism. They couldn't find enough studies linking ML to the other 4 traits. So their meta-analysis, their big combination of results, ended up being almost entirely about neuroticism. This table shows the 4 studies they ended up using for their personality analysis. You can see they all looked at neuroticism and different ways of measuring MML. What they found was a consistent small connection between being high in neuroticism and engaging in maladaptive music listening. Think of neuroticism as a tendency to experience negative emotions like worry, sadness, and anxiety more easily. So if you are high in neuroticism, you might be more prone to listening to music in ways that aren't good for you. The P value here is super small, meaning it is very unlikely this result is just a fluke. These plots help visualize the findings. The forest plot shows the effect size for each individual study and the overall combined effect. The funnel plot helps check for bias, like if only studies with positive results tend to get published. In this case, the plot looked pretty symmetrical, suggesting not much bias. So, what does this mean? It makes sense that people high in neuroticism might use music in maladaptive ways. If you are prone to feeling anxious or sad, you might reach for music as a coping mechanism, but end up using it in a way that makes things worse. However, they are quick to say that we don't know for sure if being neurotic causes MLL or if MML causes you to become more neurotic. It's probably a bit of both, a cycle. Putting it all together, this research gives us a much clearer picture of maladaptive music listening. They're proposing a working definition, music listening linked to poor psychological health, involving things like internalizing problems, externalizing problems, and inefficient coping, especially seen in adolescents and those higher in neuroticism. This is a starting point, a way to describe what they found across many studies. But they stress that this isn't a strict rule, just a way to summarize current knowledge. They also point out that the tools we use to measure MML aren't perfect. Many are only validated for teens, and we need to figure out if they work just as well for adults and for people from different cultural backgrounds. And the biggest takeaway is that we need more research. We need studies that follow people over time to see how MML develops, and studies that try to understand why it happens. We need to look at more personality traits beyond just neuroticism and really dig into what makes music listening go from healthy to unhealthy. So, the next time you are reaching for those headphones, take a moment to think about why you are listening. Is it helping or hurting? Understanding these patterns could be a big step in helping people use music to genuinely improve their well-being, rather than fall into a trap. I am really curious to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever experienced listening to music and feeling worse afterward? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science stories made simple. We'll see you next time.